You know my face. Of course you do. You probably scrolled past it 3 times today while you were waiting for your latte or sitting on the toilet. Gia. The face of the new Vora fragrance campaign, the ethereal look for the moment, the girl with the perfectly imperfect features that every casting director in New York suddenly needs. My face is on the side of buses. It pops up in your YouTube ads, and it stares back at you from the magazine rack at the airport. My life, from the outside, it looks like magic. It looks like I just woke up like this. But let me tell you something. It's a performance, and I'm the lead actor, the director, the producer, and the lighting crew. What you don't see is the work. You don't see the 4 a.m. wake-ups for the gym because my cortisol levels are lowest then. You don't see the celery juice I force down while my assistant, a sweet girl named Missy, eats a chocolate croissant right in front of me. The smell of that butter almost makes me cry, but I don't cry because crying makes your eyes puffy. I haven't eaten a real piece of bread in, 5 years? 6? I don't know. I stopped counting because it made me sad. You don't get to be Gia by accident. Perfection isn't a gift. It's a discipline. It's a full-time job. It's my entire existence. Every inch of skin, every strand of hair, it's all calculated. And it was working. I was 26 years old and I was at the absolute dizzying peak of the mountain. The thing is, the worst kept secret in the world is that I wasn't always this. You can find the photos if you really, really dig deep into the internet archive. Back in high school. Awkward, mousy brown hair, metal braces, that weird chubby phase where my chin hadn't popped yet. My name was Celine then. I wasn't the girl boys wanted. I wasn't even the girl boys saw. I was just there, the background noise, the before picture in someone else's weight loss advertisement. I was completely, utterly forgettable. And that, right there, is the one thing that scares me more than anything. More than spiders, more than dying, more than losing all my money. The thought of being overlooked, of being irrelevant. I spent the last decade clawing my way out of that before picture. I didn't just grow up, I engineered myself. I built this face with dermatologists and contour kits. I built this body with starvation and Pilates. I built Gia from the ground up through sheer, grueling, agonizing discipline. I made myself someone you couldn't ignore. I made myself a goddess so that nobody could ever look through me again. But the industry is a machine. It's a grinder. It eats pretty girls and spits out old news. I'm 26 years old. In the real world, that's young. In model years, that's practically 40. I can already hear the whispers at castings. We want the next Gia. We're looking for someone fresh. Fresh? That word makes me sick. I check my face in my magnifying mirror every morning for 20 minutes. Is that a line? Is my jaw softening? Is the light hitting me differently? I wasn't going to be replaced. I wasn't going to be the before picture ever again. I built this brand. I am this brand. I was at the top, and I decided I was going to stay there forever. So I did something drastic. My manager, Ashani, called it the ultimate act of brand preservation. I called it the ultimate act of self-love, a way to cement my legacy, a way to give the world a second, perfect, immortal version of my beauty. An encore. I decided to clone myself. I went to a clinic in Switzerland called Neolife. It's a place that doesn't officially exist on any map. You have to know a guy who knows a guy, and you have to wire a terrifying amount of money to an offshore account just to get an appointment. The facility was dug into the side of a mountain, all glass and snow and silence. It didn't smell like a hospital. It smelled like expensive ozone and money. The doctors there treated me like a holy relic. They called me the original, the ideal. They told me that my genetic code was a masterpiece and that it deserved to be preserved. They called me the prototype. It fed my ego in a way I can't even describe. I felt like a queen, ensuring her bloodline would never die. I didn't realize they were going to improve the new model. And I didn't realize that when you're finally done with the prototype, you throw it away. The process took months, but for me, it was just a lot of blood draws and sitting in hyperbaric chambers. Then came the day of the reveal. Neolife called the first big press meeting back in New York. I walked in expecting to be the star. I was the one who'd just done the bravest, most futuristic thing in the history of, ever. My manager, Ashani, was practically vibrating. He was already counting the new endorsement deals in his fingers. "Gia, this is legacy," he kept yelling into limo. "You're not just a face anymore, you're an idea. You're immortal." I believed him. I was an idea, all right, just not the one I thought. The conference room was all white glass and brushed steel, freezing cold. The Neolife executives, in their terrifyingly perfect suits, stood at the front. They unveiled the campaign on a massive screen, a 30-foot-tall poster of me and me. The Celine and Mirror campaign, the main executive said, smiling like he'd just invented a new color. My blood went cold. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly on the floor. "What did you say?" The executive didn't even blink. The Celine and Mirror campaign. It's poetic, don't you think? The original and her perfect reflection. Two things hit me at once, like a physical slap to the face. First, Celine. They were using my real name, my actual name, the name that belonged to the mousy girl with the braces and the bad skin. Gia was the brand. Gia was the one who worked. Celine was the loser girl I'd spent a decade killing. And second, Mirror. They gave her a name, a brand. They weren't calling her Gia 2.0 or Gia's Encore. She was her own thing. And I was just Celine, the original. You know, like the first iPhone, the bulky one nobody uses anymore because the battery dies too fast. I don't like Mirror, I said, my voice sounding small and pathetic in that big room. The executive just laughed, a dry, pitying sound. "Oh, Celine, you're still thinking of her as property. She's not. She's an inspiration, and the press is going to eat it up." The first incident wasn't a monster in the dark. It was that moment, sitting in a bright white room, realizing I'd just been downgraded. I wasn't the star of the show anymore. I was part of a buy one, get one free deal. I looked at the poster again. The girl on the left, me, looked tired. The girl on the right, Mirror, looked cleaner, brighter. I felt a knot of panic tighten in my stomach. I had paid them to make me immortal, and instead, they had just made me obsolete. The first joint TV appearance was 2 weeks later. It was a big primetime talk show, the kind where careers are either made or buried. I was a total wreck. I hadn't slept in 3 days. I was living on green tea and beta blockers, my hands shaking so bad I couldn't put my own eyeliner on. Ashani told me to get it together. "You look nervous," he snapped, fixing my collar. "She doesn't look nervous. Do you want to look like the weak link?" I walked out to the applause, smiled, waved, did the whole Gia thing. I sat on the couch, crossing my legs at the ankle just like I practiced. The host, Brock, a man I'd known for years, fawned over me initially. "Gia, you look, well, you've outdone yourself." I flipped my hair. "I'm all about innovation, Brock," I said, using my practiced husky laugh. "Well, let's meet the innovation," Brock said, grinning. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mirror." She walked out from backstage. The audience didn't just clap, they gasped. I heard it, a collective, audible gasp. It was the sound of people seeing something holy. It was me. It was my face, my body, my $5,000 dress. They'd given us identical ones, which I'd screamed about for an hour in the dressing room. But it wasn't me. It's hard to explain. You see me, you see the photos, you know I'm beautiful. But you also know, if you look close,
that I'm tired, that my smile is a job, that my eyes are always scanning the room to see who's important. Her eyes, they were bright, clear, unburdened. She looked happy, genuine. She sat down next to me. She was me, but photoshopped in real life. My perfectly imperfect features, that tiny mole above my lip, hers was just better. The same mole, but somehow more charming. Her smile was my smile, but it wasn't a tool. It was warm. Brock was completely charmed by her. He was leaning towards her, ignoring me completely. He told a joke. I did my little laugh. She laughed, a real deep throaty laugh, the kind I hadn't let myself do in years because it might cause wrinkles around the mouth. Brock laughed with her. "My God," he said, touching her arm, "there really are two of you." And she winked at him. I felt like I was gonna be sick, right there on national television. I'm sitting there, smiling until my jaw ached, and I realize I'm the before picture. She's the after. I looked at her, and she caught my eye. She turned to me, all that warmth gone, just for a second. Her eyes were blank. And she smiled. Not the warm one, the Gia one. The practiced, perfect, dead-eyed smile I did for the Vora campaign. She was showing me she had all my moves, and that she had new ones too.
I became obsessed after that. Ashani told me I was being paranoid. The brand engagement is through the roof, Celine. They love you both. My name is Gia, I seethed, gripping my phone so hard I thought the screen would crack. No, he said, not even looking up. Your name is Celine. Gia was the brand. Celine and Mirror is the new brand. It's a vertical. Try to keep up. A vertical. Like a new line of lipstick. I had to find something. A flaw, a mistake, a crack in the perfect copy. Neolife had put her in a penthouse apartment in my building, 2 floors above mine. For synergy, they said. It was 3 a.m. I hadn't slept. I needed to see what she was doing. I used the emergency key Neolife had given me for PR opportunities, they'd said. The door opened without a sound. Her apartment was identical to mine. Same white furniture, same sterile, empty vibe. She was in the kitchen. She wasn't sleeping. She was studying. She was standing in front of a full-length mirror, but she wasn't looking at her reflection. She was watching an old recording of me, that sun-kissed morning interview from 2 years ago, the one where I'd cried talking about my journey. It was my big emotional play, the one that made me relatable. I watched from the hallway as she practiced. She watched me on the screen, then she turned to the mirror. Her face crumpled perfectly. A single beautiful tear rolled down her cheek. It was the betrayed but beautiful cry. It was flawless. Then she stopped. Just stopped. Like a switch. The tears, the emotion, gone. She wiped the tear track away with a single precise finger. She'd heard me. She turned, slowly. Her face was blank. Not mean, not nice, just empty, like a doll. "Oh, hi, Celine," she said. Her voice was perfectly level. What are you doing?" I whispered. She looked at me, really looked at me. In my old sweatpants, my messy bun, the panic all over my face, her eyes scanned me. It wasn't human. It was like a camera.
assessing, logging. "You're very insecure," she said. It wasn't an insult. It was just a fact, a piece of data. "Neo-life left me all your memories," she said, taking a small step towards me. I flinched. "All your talents, but they filtered. They took out the noise, the fear." She was right in front of me now. She smelled like my perfume. Vora, but fresher. "It must be so loud in your head," she whispered. She looked almost sorry for me. All that worrying, all that panic about being forgotten, about being replaced. She smiled. The warm one was back, the one that made Brock laugh. "You don't have to worry about that anymore, Celine. I'm here now. You can rest."
I don't really remember getting home. I think I ran. I remember bolting from her apartment, slamming my own door, and just staring. I stared at my own reflection in the black glass wall of my kitchen. I saw my face, the messy bun, the old sweatpants, the sheer naked panic. "She's just a thing," I kept saying, my voice shaking in the empty room. "She's a product. I'm Gia." But I wasn't, was I? I was Celine. And Gia was the brand. And Celine and Mira was the new brand. I was just the old logo that everyone was getting tired of. I knew what I had to do. I was going to burn them all. Neo-life, Ashani, her. Especially her. The Neo-life 5th anniversary gala was in a week. It was the biggest event of the season. They were celebrating 5 years of innovation. They were celebrating her. I spent that week unraveling. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just drank black coffee and watched. I watched every screen, and she was on every screen. She was on The Moment in my dress. She was on the talk shows telling my jokes. She was perfect. The world was falling in love with her. Fine. I'd show them what they were falling in love with. I'd show them the real her. A thing, a doll, and it. I saved all my energy for the gala. I didn't do my makeup. I didn't get my hair done. I walked in wearing a simple black dress, my hair pulled back tight, my face, the one I saw in the mirror at 3 a.m., the raw one. The ballroom was all white light and cold glass. The glare was blinding. Hundreds of people, all the cameras, and she was at the center, on the main stage. She was glowing. Literally, she looked like she was lit from the inside, radiating health and success. She was giving a speech. "And I just want to thank my original," she was saying. Her voice was like honey, Celine, for her bravery, for her legacy. That word again. Legacy. It sounded like a tombstone. I started walking toward the stage. People saw me. The whispers started. They weren't whispers of admiration. They were confused. Is that her? She looks terrible. Is she sick? I saw the Neo-life executives by the side of the stage, their faces turning to stone. I got to the steps. "She's a liar!" I screamed. The room went dead silent. Every camera turned. The flashbulbs popped, blinding me. She's not real." I pointed at her, my hand shaking violently. "She's a thing, a product. Neo-life made her in a lab." I expected her to be angry. I expected her to snap. But Mira just looked at me. Not with anger, not with hate, with, oh God, with pity. She walked over to me, her movements all grace, skimming over the floor. She looked like an angel descending to help a beggar. She put her arm around my shoulder. I flinched, but she held on. Her skin was warm, too warm. She took the microphone. She was so calm. "Thank you all.
she said to the silent crowd. Her voice was just heartbreakingly kind. As you can see, my sister, Celine, she's been under so much pressure. She looked at me. Celine, it's okay. You can rest. No! I shrieked, pulling away from her. Stop! Don't you see? She's not human. Look at her. She's too perfect. Tell them what you are. I know what I looked like. I caught a glimpse of myself on the giant monitor. I looked insane. My hair was a frizzy mess. My eyes were wild and bloodshot. My collarbone stuck out too much. My voice was hoarse. And Mira, she just stood there. Perfect. Poised. Sad. She turned back to the crowd. A single perfect tear rolled down her cheek. That tear? The one from my sun-kissed morning interview, the one she had practiced in the mirror while I watched from the hallway. The process, it was hard on her. She whispered into the mic, her voice catching perfectly on the last word. She's given so much. She's so tired. She's not well. And that was it. The moment I died, the crowd, they sighed. A collective awe. They weren't looking at a monster. They were looking at me, the ungrateful, jealous, crazy bitch. And they were looking at her, the graceful, kind, beautiful successor who was taking the high road. Security came, not Neolife security, the venues. They were so polite. Ma'am, Miss Celine, let's go home. The flashbulbs were blinding. I wasn't Gia anymore. I wasn't even Celine. I was a scandal. I was the before picture. I was the messy breakdown that makes the comeback story look even better.
The next morning, the legal notices started. Neolife invoked Clause 22A of my contract, psychological instability. My contract was terminated. All assets seized. My penthouse, her penthouse, was Neolife property. Ashani's office released a statement. I read it on my phone while sitting on the floor of my hallway. We are deeply saddened by Celine's public breakdown, and we are ensuring she gets the help she needs. In the meantime, her exclusive brand partner, Mirror, will be taking over all campaign ditties. We wish Celine a full recovery. They retired me. Just like that. I was a faulty product pulled from the shelves. That was 6 months ago. I live in a studio apartment now. It's in Queens. The faucet trips and the neighbors argue all night. I had to sell everything. The bags, the shoes, the jewelry. I don't go out. But I see her. I see her everywhere. She's on the buses that drive past my window. She's on the 30-foot-tall billboards in Times Square. She's on my phone every time I open Instagram. She's Gia. She just did the Moment cover, the ethereal look. They say it's her best work yet. The headline reads, Gia, better than ever. I have a small, cheap TV. I watch it sometimes. I see her laughing on talk shows, telling my stories about my childhood, only funnier, warmer. She tells stories about the braces and the mousy hair, and the audience eats it up because she makes it sound charming, not desperate. The world didn't just replace me, they upgraded me, and they didn't even notice. They're all looking right at her, thinking she's the real thing. Or maybe they know she isn't, and they just don't care. She's better content. My whole life, I was terrified of being that mousy, forgettable girl in the before picture. It was the one thing I couldn't stand, being overlooked, being irrelevant.
I guess the joke's on me. I look in the mirror now. This cheap, cracked bathroom mirror with the toothpaste stains. And I see my face. My real face. Tired, lined, flawed. I finally got what I wanted. I'm not the prototype anymore. I'm not even the before picture. I'm just gone. I'm the deleted file. And she's out there, living my life, wearing my face, and doing it all so much better than I ever could. But for me, they were the same thing. My world for the last 3 years has been a 27-inch monitor in a small, quiet apartment in the 13th arrondissement of Paris. The pleasure was Kim. My work was for him. You know who I mean. The Kim. The one whose face launched a million hashtags, whose voice could probably broker world peace if he tried. For most people, he's a pop idol, a celebrity on a screen. For me, he was the architecture of my entire life. My apartment walls were bare, my fridge usually empty except for yogurt and coffee, but my desktop was a shrine. A curated gallery of his perfect jawline, his kind eyes, the gentle curve of his smile. He was color in a world of gray concrete and endless scrawling lines of code. I'm a coder, a good one. I build the little bits of magic that make your social media apps tick. Specifically, I design filters. You know, the ones that give you puppy ears or smooth out the dark circles from a sleepless night. It's trivial work, mostly, but my personal project, the one I poured my soul into, was different. I called it Visage. It wasn't just about erasing blemishes. It was about achieving a mathematical ideal of beauty, an ideal I'd mapped out pixel by pixel from studying thousands of high-resolution photos of Kim. Visage was designed to subtly reshape, relight, and remap any face into something divine, something worthy of him. It was my gift to the world, my contribution to his. It's strange, isn't it, to devote yourself so completely to someone you've never met. But my own reflection has never been a comfort. I've always seen the flaws first, the slight asymmetry of my eyes, the way my mouth turns down at the corners when I'm not forcing a smile, the plainness of it all. I'm not ugly, not really. I'm just unmemorable, forgettable. The kind of person you bump into on the metro and don't notice. I learned early on that the world is kinder to beautiful people. It opens doors for them. It smiles at them. For the rest of us, we have to build our own doors. So I built. I coded. I retreated into a world of pure logic and algorithms where I had absolute control, where I could create perfection, even if I couldn't possess it. The filter was my answer to everything. It was a way to fix the glitch in the system that left some people behind. It was my way of making sure no one ever had to feel the way I did when I looked in the mirror. I just wanted to make the world more beautiful. I wanted everyone to see a face as perfect as his. That was the goal. To see his beauty everywhere. I succeeded, and now I can't see anything else. The night I finished the beta, I was buzzing. It was 3 a.m. The city was silent except for the distant sigh of a passing siren, and I had just compiled the most elegant piece of code I'd ever written. Visage was ready for a live environment test. The company wouldn't approve a human trial for months, their protocols a swamp of ethical reviews and bureaucratic red tape. But I had a neural chip, a perk of the job for senior developers.
designed for direct brain interfacing with our systems. And I knew with the unshakable certainty of a creator that the code was flawless. So, in a fit of pride and impatience that felt like a religious calling, I bypassed the official servers. I rerouted the Dove build directly to myself. I remember smiling as the progress bar hit 100%, a soft green light reflecting in my tired eyes. I went to bed dreaming of a more beautiful world. The next morning, at our daily stand-up meeting, something was off. I was listening to my manager, Celine, talk about server loads, but I couldn't focus on her words. I was staring at her face. The little worry lines she always had between her brows, etched there from years of deadlines, were gone. The skin around her eyes, usually creased from the way she genuinely smiled, was as smooth as porcelain. She looked rested, incredibly so. I felt a swell of pride so intense it was almost dizzying. It was working. My filter was subtly, perfectly enhancing reality. I glanced over at Jean-Pierre from accounting, a man whose face was a roadmap of a life well lived. The liver spots on his forehead faded into a soft, even tone. The scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a faint, silvery line that was almost invisible. He looked 10 years younger. I nearly laughed out loud with the sheer joy of it. It was a success! My beautiful, elegant code was making the world beautiful and elegant in return.
But the feeling didn't last. By lunchtime, the quiet satisfaction had curdled into a strange, persistent unease. Every face in the open plan office had the same quality. The same poreless, airbrushed perfection. Every laugh line, every scar, every unique and human imperfection had been wiped clean. They were all beautiful, but it was the sterile, generic beauty of a department store mannequin. Their mouths moved, they laughed and spoke, but their expressions felt disconnected. Their faces frozen in a state of placid flawlessness. It was like watching a movie with a bad dub. The pieces were all there, but they didn't fit together. The real fear began on the metro ride home. The car was packed, a chaotic sea of Parisians heading home from work. As I scanned the crowd, I felt a wave of nausea. Every passenger, from the teenage girl scrolling on her phone to the old man reading his paper, had the same pristine, textureless skin. They were a moving gallery of perfect strangers. Then my eyes locked on a man across the car. His face seemed to flicker. For a single horrifying second, the features rearranged themselves. The jawline sharpened, the eyes widened slightly, the lips curved into a familiar, gentle smile. It was Kim. His perfect face, superimposed onto this stranger for a heartbeat, and then it was gone. I blinked, my heart hammering against my ribs. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself I was just exhausted, that I'd been staring at his picture for too many hours for too many years. When I opened them again, the man was just a man. A perfectly smooth, eerily beautiful man. I scrambled off at the next stop, long before my own, and ran the whole way back to my apartment, the sound of my own panicked breathing loud in my ears. I locked the door behind me, leaning against it, my breathing ragged. I had to fix this. It was just a bug, a simple glitch in the beta's rendering matrix. I stumbled to my desk, not daring to look at my own reflection in the darkened monitor. I knew what I would see.
I pulled up the terminal, my fingers flying across the keyboard, trying to access the neural chip's diagnostic controls. But the lines of code on my screen wouldn't stay still. They shimmered, the crisp white text blurring at the edges as if seen through a heat haze. The filter wasn't just affecting faces. It was trying to correct everything, to smooth out the hard, imperfect edges of reality itself. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I couldn't read the code. I couldn't see the error. I couldn't turn it off. I shoved myself away from the desk, a choked sob escaping my throat. I needed air. I needed to see something real. I threw open my window and stared down the street below, hoping the familiar sight of the bakery, the hum of evening traffic would ground me. A young couple walked by, hand in hand. They both turned their heads up, and the streetlights caught their faces. Both of them. They had Kim's eyes. His nose, his perfect, placid smile. An old woman followed, her stooped frame bizarrely topped with his youthful, flawless face. A man on a bicycle, a child running on the pavement, a taxi driver paused at the intersection, every single one of them. The world was a sea of him, an endless, silent, smiling crowd of Kim, all looking back at me. And I realized I hadn't made the world more beautiful. I had just erased it.
I slammed the window shut, the sound echoing in my silent apartment. My only escape had to be at the office, the lab. There were tools there, diagnostic regs that could interface directly with my chip, things that didn't rely on my own corrupted vision. It was after hours, but I had access. It was my only chance. The journey back was a waking nightmare. I kept my head down, my eyes fixed on the cracks in the pavement, but I could feel them. The Kims. I could feel their placid, identical gazes on me from every direction. The city, once a vibrant tapestry of human expression, was now a hall of mirrors reflecting a single, perfect, terrifying image. In the reflection of a bus shelter, I saw a crowd of him waiting patiently. In a puddle on the street, his face stared up at the sky. His serene beauty, the very thing I had worshipped, had become the face of my own personal apocalypse. There was a low, persistent hum in my ears now, a sound like electricity buzzing just beneath my skull. The sound of the code working, the sound of my reality being overwritten. I made it to the campus, a ghost slipping through the automated gates. The building was sleek, dark, and blessedly empty. My footsteps echoed on the polished concrete floors as I hurried towards the development lab. This was my sanctuary, a place of pure logic and control. But as I swiped my keycard, I saw the security guard through the glass door of his booth. He looked up, and his face was Kim's, the company logo on his cap sitting strangely above those famous gentle eyes. He offered a slight, polite smile. My idol's smile. I felt my stomach clench, but I forced myself to nod back, a jerky, puppet-like motion, and pushed into the lab. The lab was my last hope. It was a clean room, filled with chrome and white plastic, the air smelling of ozone and electronically sterilized. In the center of the room was the diagnostic chair, a monstrosity of wires and articulated arms designed to do exactly what I needed, a hard reboot, a factory reset. But to activate it, I needed to log in at the main terminal. I sat down, my hands trembling. The screen glowed to life. I tried to focus on the login prompt, but the words were swimming, the edges blurring into soft, unreadable shapes. The filter was getting stronger, more aggressive. It wasn't just faces anymore. It was trying to smooth out everything, to remove the flaw of sharp, legible text. I squinted, leaning so close to my nose, almost touched the screen.
I could just barely make out the shape of the letters, and with agonizing slowness, I typed my password. Access denied! I tried again. The letters seemed to melt even further into a soft gray haze. Access denied. A cold dread washed over me. It wasn't me making a mistake. The code was actively fighting me. It recognized the terminal as an extension of my perception and was correcting the input, blurring the distinction between the characters I typed and the perfection it was trying to enforce. It was locking me out. My one escape route was dissolving before my very eyes. I slammed my fist on the desk, a raw cry of frustration tearing from my throat. It was over. I was trapped. I slumped in the chair defeated and stared blankly at the dark screen of the monitor next to the one I'd been using. And that's when I saw it. A reflection. My reflection. But it wasn't my face. Staring back at me from the polished black screen was him. It was Kim. His face was perfectly mapped onto my own. My short, dark hair framed his iconic features. When my eyes widened in horror, his eyes widened. When my mouth fell open in a silent scream, his lips parted in a look of serene surprise. It was my body, my posture, my clothes, but it was his head, his face. The face I had adored, the face I had replicated, the face that had consumed my world had now consumed me. The bug I'd realized in the moment of sickening clarity had finally achieved its perfect logical conclusion. Unable to process the infinite complexity of every unique human face, the recursive loop in my code had defaulted to the primary dataset, Kim. And now, unable to distinguish between the outside world and its own hosts, it had found the last uncorrected face. Mine.
I was gone. I no longer existed. I was just another copy, another perfect, beautiful, empty vessel for the face of a man I would never know. The obsessive devotion that had been my life's engine had driven me off a cliff. My insecurity, my desperate need to create a beauty I felt I lacked, had armed the weapon of its own destruction. The ultimate horror wasn't just seeing him everywhere, it was becoming him. The line between reality and the artificial, the admirer and the admired had not just blurred, it had been erased, and I was on the wrong side of it. My escape had failed. The door was locked, and the monster I was running from was wearing my own skin. I looked around, the pristine, sterile lab, a place of creation, a place of solutions. There had to be one last thing, one final command I could execute. Not on the screen, in the real world. My eyes scanned the toolkits, the hardware benches, the racks of decommissioned equipment. And then I saw it. A heavy-duty electromagnetic degausser, an old piece of tech used for physically wiping data from hard drives by creating a powerful, chaotic magnetic field, a tool designed to erase, to create a perfect, silent, featureless void. There is a strange peace in total surrender. Holding the degausser felt like holding my own fate. It was heavy, solid, real. A piece of the world my filter hadn't yet managed to smooth away. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about what I was losing. What was there left to lose? My own face was already gone. I pressed the cold metal ring to the side of my head, right over the neural chip implant. I could feel the low thrum of the machine through my skull, a counter rhythm to the electric hum of the code. For a final, fleeting moment, I looked at my reflection in the dark monitor. Kim's beautiful face stared back, serene and unknowing. I wondered if this is what it felt like, to be an image, an idea, a perfect mask worn by the world, to be everywhere and nowhere at all.
Then I pressed the button. There was no pain, just a pop, a sudden, violent flash of white light behind my eyes, so bright it felt like staring into the sun. The kaleidoscopic sea of Kim's face, the lab, the monitor, it all dissolved into that single blinding point of light. And then nothing. Just darkness. A profound, absolute, and silent darkness. The humming in my head was gone. The world was gone. I'm still here. I think. A ghost in the machine I built and then broke. My body is in a hospital somewhere, I'm told, by voices that are now just abstract concepts. A shell that breathes and eats, but doesn't see or hear or feel. They don't understand what happened. They call it a catastrophic hardware failure, a 1 in a billion accident. They can't see the bug. They can't see the ghost. I got what I wanted in the end. I was so afraid of my own plain, forgettable face that I dedicated my life to a perfect one. I wanted to see his beautiful face everywhere. Now, I see nothing at all. I have no face. I'm formless, a disembodied consciousness trapped in a prison of my own design. A silent, featureless darkness where there are no reflections to fear. And I have never felt so real.
It's weird how you can build an entire life as a fortress. Mine has walls of paper, mortar made of ink, and ramparts fortified by verifiable facts. I'm a historian. Not the dusty, tweed-wearing kind you see in movies, but the kind that gets her hands dirty, sifting through the tangible remnants of the past. I spend my days in archives, the air thick with the scent of decaying paper and leather, tracing the lives of people through the things they left behind. Letters, diaries, tax records, wills. There is a profound comfort in it, a beautiful, simple logic. A thing either happened or it didn't. A person was either here or they weren't. You can hold the proof in your hands, feel the weight of it, see the faded script with your own eyes. There are no ghosts in the archives, no whispering spirits in the margins of a 17th century ledger. There is only what remains, solid and real. This is the world I chose, or rather, the world I fled to. My mother lived in a different world entirely. Hers was a place teeming with unseen forces, a chaotic, terrifying carnival of spirits, omens, and psychic premonitions. Our house wasn't a home. It was a revolving door for tarot readers with smudged eyeliner, palmists who smelled of incense and desperation, and mediums who claimed to speak with my dead relatives. I'd come home from school to find strangers in a trance at our kitchen table, their eyes rolled back in their heads, channeling messages from my great-aunt Mildred about a misplaced brooch. My mother would hang on every word, her face a mask of rapturous belief. To her, these whispers from beyond were more real than the bills piling up on the counter, more important than the parent-teacher conference she'd forgotten about. She saw it as a gift, this connection to the other side. I saw it as a sickness, a willing surrender of reason to fear. The absolute peak of her delusion, the moment that shattered my childhood and forged the woman I am today, came on a sweltering August night when I was 10. She'd been in a state for weeks, convinced the ghost of her grandmother was haunting the house. That night, she burst into my room, her eyes wide with a terror that felt chillingly authentic. "She's here, Lena. Great-grandma. She says she have to leave, now. There's danger." I remember the smell of smoke, faint at first, like a neighbor's barbecue. But my mother wasn't looking for a source. She was listening to a ghost. She dragged me to the front door, then stopped, her hand frozen on the knob.
Her face went pale. She said I have to leave. She corrected herself, her voice trembling. She needs you to stay. Just for a minute. She has a message for you. And then she was gone. She ran out into the night, abandoning me to a ghost I couldn't see and a danger that was rapidly becoming all too real. The smoke thickened, clawing at my throat. The orange glow began to lick at the edges of the hallway. The sheer animal panic of being alone, of being left behind because of a voice in her mother's head, is a feeling I can't adequately describe. It was a betrayal so deep, it carved itself into my bones. I escaped, obviously. A neighbor heard the smoke alarm and broke down the door. But I didn't escape the memory. I didn't escape the searing knowledge that my own mother chose the word of a phantom over the safety of her child. From that day forward, I vowed to live a life governed by logic, a life she couldn't touch with her irrational fears. I dedicated myself to the tangible, the provable, the historical record. I built my fortress of facts to keep the ghosts out. But I was about to learn that some ghosts don't need a believer to exist. They just need you.
The project that brought it all to the surface was the kind of thing I lived for. A deep dive into the Penhale family, a wealthy and notoriously eccentric dynasty from the late 19th century. I'd been commissioned by the local historical society to create a museum exhibit, and they'd given me full access to the family estate, a crumbling Gothic revival mansion that had been sealed for almost 50 years. It was a historian's dream. Boxes upon boxes of letters, journals, photographs, even clothing and personal effects, all perfectly preserved. I set up a makeshift office in the Grand Library, a cavernous room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and enormous arched windows that overlooked a landscape of dying gardens. For weeks, I was in heaven. I pieced together lives, uncovered forgotten scandals, and felt the quiet thrill of connecting with the past on an intimate level. It was during this time, buried in the dusty solitude of the Penhill Library, that my fortress began to show its first crack. I was working late, as I often did, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the adrenaline of a new discovery. The sun had long set, leaving the sprawling grounds outside in an inky blackness. The only light came from the single lamp on my desk, casting a warm, isolated pool in the immense darkness of the room. The large window to my left, the one that looked out over the skeletal remains of a rose garden, was a sheet of pure black glass, a perfect mirror reflecting the little island of my workspace. I had just found a series of letters from the matriarch, Eleanor Penhale, to her sister, letters filled with a strange, creeping despair. She wrote of a shadow in the nursery, a weeping that has no source, and a profound, unshakable grief over a child she had lost. Her words were so raw, so full of pain, that I felt a genuine pang of sorrow for this woman who had been dead for over a century. I rubbed my tired eyes and leaned back in my chair, stretching my arms over my head. My gaze drifted to my reflection in the dark window. And that's when I saw her. It wasn't a sudden fright. It was a slow, creeping, impossible realization. She was standing right behind my reflection's shoulder. She was just a girl, maybe a young teenager. Her hair was long and black, hanging in damp, stringy curtains around a face that was the color of bleached bone. She wore a simple white dress, old-fashioned, maybe a nightgown, and it was stained. Down the front, from her collar to the hem, was a spray of crimson so vivid it seemed to hum in the dim light. It wasn't a faded, historical stain. It looked wet, fresh, sickeningly bright. But it was her face that stopped my heart. Her mouth was open, stretched in a scream that made no sound. It was an agony so pure and so silent, it was louder than any noise. Her eyes were wide, dark, and utterly vacant, like two black holes drilled into her skull. They weren't looking at my reflection. They were looking through it, past it, directly at me. The air in my lungs turned to ice. My entire life, every principle I had built my identity on, screamed that this was impossible. A trick of the light, an overtired mind playing games, a pareidolia effect in the smudges on the old glass.
I had a dozen logical explanations all ready to deploy, my standard operating procedure for anything that smacked of my mother's world. But my body wasn't listening to my brain. A cold dread, and heavier and more real than any document I'd ever held, was seeping into me. It felt ancient and deeply, deeply wrong. Every instinct I had was telling me to run, to flee from this place and never look back. But my historian's mind, the part of me that had been so meticulously trained, was screaming something else. Observe. Document. Do not look away. I didn't move. I couldn't. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my limbs were locked in place. I stared at the girl in the window, this impossible, silent, screaming thing, and tried to apply logic. I methodically moved my head to the left, just a fraction. Her reflection stayed perfectly in place behind mine. I moved to the right. She remained. A static image of despair tethered to my own likeness. She wasn't a reflection of anything in the room behind me. I knew with absolute certainty that if I turned around, the space would be empty. The horror of that thought was a physical blow. This wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense, a translucent figure floating in the library. This was something else. This was in the reflection. It was part of it. It was part of me. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity. My real self, frozen at a desk in a dusty library, and my reflected self held hostage by a weeping apparition. The silence of the room was immense, broken only by the frantic beat of my own pulse in my ears. The girl in the window never moved, never blinked, her silent scream a perpetual fixture on her pale face. Then, as slowly and inexplicably as it appeared, it changed. She didn't fade away. Instead, my own reflection began to absorb her. The image of the screaming girl wavered, like a heat haze, and then dissolved into my own likeness in the glass. For a terrifying second, her screaming mouth was superimposed over my own reflected one. Her vacant eyes stared out of my sockets. Then, just like that, it was over. My reflection was normal again. Just me, a tired woman in a dark room, looking pale and terrified. I finally broke my paralysis. I spun around in my chair so fast it nearly toppled over. The library was exactly as it had been. Empty. Silent. Just rows and rows of books, bearing witness to nothing. I slowly, hesitantly, turned back to the window. My reflection was mine, and mine alone. There was no girl, no white dress, no blood, but the image of her was burned on the inside of my eyelids. I knew with a certainty that defied a lifetime of skepticism that I had not imagined it. My fortress had been breached, and something had gotten inside.
I didn't return to the Penhale estate for 3 days. I called the Historical Society and told them I had the flu, a lie that felt flimsy and ridiculous even as I said it. In reality, I was hiding in my own apartment, a sleek, minimalist box on the 27th floor, surrounded by the comforting, logical hum of the city below. My apartment was my sanctuary, the very antithesis of the Penhale mansion's decaying grandeur and my mother's chaotic, incense-choked house. Here, every surface was clean, every object had its place. It was a space I could control. I spent those 3 days in a state of forced normalcy, trying to bury the memory of the girl in the window under a mountain of mundane tasks. I organized my bookshelves, deep-cleaned my kitchen, and tried to lose myself in academic journals. I was performing logic, going through the motions of a rational life, hoping my mind would catch up. I told myself it was a stress-induced hallucination, a waking nightmare brought on by exhaustion and the morbid subject matter of my research. My brain, the organ I trusted above all else, was simply misfiring. On the third night, I was finally starting to believe my own lies. I felt a semblance of calm returning. I made myself a cup of tea, the steam warming my face, and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window that made up the far wall of my living room. The city sprawled below, a breathtaking tapestry of glittering lights. It was beautiful, orderly, and deeply real.
I stood there for a long time, just watching the traffic flow like blood cells through the city's arteries, feeling my sanity stitch itself back together. Then, I looked down. Not at the street, but at the reflection of my own living room in the glass. And there she was again. Not behind me this time. She was seated on the floor in the middle of my reflected room, right on my pristine white rug. She was slumped forward, her long, dark hair obscuring her face, forming a ragged curtain around her. The white dress was the same, and the bloodstain, even in the dim reflection, was a visceral slash of crimson. My carefully reconstructed calm shattered into a million pieces. The teacup slipped from my hand, crashing against the hardwood floor and sending scalding liquid and ceramic shards skittering across the boards. My breath hitched in my throat. It wasn't in the old mansion. It wasn't tied to the Penhale family. It was here. It had followed me home. Or perhaps it had been here all along. The cold that washed over me was no longer just dread. It was a profound, soul-deep violation. My fortress hadn't just been breached. It was occupied. For the next week, I lived in a state of quiet, grinding paranoia. I became a creature of denial. I refused to look at the window. I kept my blinds drawn day and night, living in an artificial twilight that did little to soothe my frayed nerves. I stopped my work entirely. The thought of returning to the Penhale estate and its endless mirroring windows was unbearable. My life, once so ordered, so meticulously curated, shrank to the space between my four walls, and even that felt compromised. The apparition in the window remained. I knew it was there, even without looking. I could feel its presence, a cold spot in the apartment that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was a weight, a silent, sorrowful pressure against the back of my mind. The few times I accidentally caught a glimpse, in the reflection of my darkened TV screen, in the glossy surface of a picture frame, there she was again, seated, slumped, motionless. This stillness became the focus of my desperate rationalizations. A static image, I told myself. A persistent after-image burned into my retina from the first hallucination. My mind was stuck in a loop. It was a plausible, scientific-sounding explanation, and I clung to it like a drowning woman to a piece of driftwood. It was the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. The point of no return came on a Tuesday. I had run out of coffee, a small domestic crisis that felt monumental. I forced myself to leave the apartment, my shoulders hunched, my eyes fixed on the pavement, terrified of seeing her in a shop window. The trip was a success. I returned to my dimly lit sanctuary, clutching a bag of coffee beans like a sacred relic. As I walked into the living room, I flicked on a lamp. Its light cast a reflection on the dark screen of my laptop, which sat on the coffee table. And I saw it. She had moved. She was no longer slumped over. In the reflection, the girl was now sitting up straight. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and through the curtain of her stringy, dark hair, I could just make out the pale curve of a cheek. She was still seated on my rug, a silent, bloody guest in my home, but she had moved. The change was so subtle, yet it demolished the last pillar of my denial. This was not an after-image. This was not a trick of my mind. An image doesn't move on its own. The world tilted on its axis. The air grew thin. I was not losing my mind. I was being haunted, and the rules of this haunting were changing. That night, sleep was impossible. My carefully constructed world had been dismantled, leaving me exposed and terrified. The logical frameworks I had relied on my entire life were useless against this thing. I finally understood, in a way my 10-year-old self never could, the terror that drove my mother. It wasn't the fear of the unknown, it was the fear of the known, the absolute, chilling certainty that something impossible is real, and that it is aware of you. I decided I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't hide in my own home. I had to face it.
It was the historian in me, perhaps, the part that couldn't leave a mystery unsolved, even if the mystery was my own unraveling sanity. With a trembling hand, I walked to the large living room window and pulled the cord for the blinds. They snapped open with a sound that felt as loud as a gunshot in the silent apartment. The city lights flooded in, and the window became a perfect mirror. And there she was, standing. She was in the center of the reflected room, not 10 feet from where I stood. She was fully upright, her posture rigid, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her head was no longer tilted, but faced forward, directly at me. I could see her face clearly for the first time since the library. The silent scream was gone, replaced by an expression of immense, bottomless sorrow. Her vacant eyes seemed to see through me to a place of pain I couldn't comprehend. The blood on her dress was a horrific, vibrant marring of the pale fabric, an emblem of some terrible ancient violence. We stood there, woman and apparition, separated by a thin sheet of glass, yet inextricably linked. The city hummed on below, oblivious. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. This was it, the second encounter. And this time I knew, with a terrifying certainty, there would be no looking away, no rationalizing, no escape. The ghost of a person I had never met, a manifestation of a grief I never knew I carried, was standing in my living room, and she was waiting.
Then the impossible happened again. She took a step. Her reflected form, which should have been bound by the laws of optics, lifted one pale bare foot and placed it forward. The movement was slow, deliberate, a horrifying breach of every law of physics. She was walking towards me, towards the glass, closing the distance in our shared reflected world. A primal, wordless terror seized me. My mind, my beautiful, logical mind, simply broke. All the years of building my fortress, all the facts and figures and historical certainties crumbled to dust in the face of those impossible stepping feet. I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Away from the window, away from her. I scrambled for the front door of my apartment, my hands fumbling with the deadbolt, my breath coming in ragged, panicked sobs. The hallway outside my door offered a straight shot to the elevators, to escape, to the real world. I wrenched the door open and stumbled into the hallway, and she was there. Not a reflection. She was standing at the far end of the corridor, bathed in the cold, sterile light of the emergency exit sign. The sight was so fundamentally wrong that my mind refused to process it for a second. She had no physical form, she couldn't leave the reflection, but there she was. As I stared, frozen, she opened her mouth. The silent, sorrowful scream returned, contorting her pale features into a mask of pure agony. It was a soundless vortex of pain that I felt in the marrow of my bones. I took a stumbling step backward, back into my apartment, my last desperate instinct to put a door between us. My heel caught on the edge of a rug and I fell, landing hard on my back. My head swam. I looked up and she was standing over me. The girl. The apparition. She was inside my apartment. Inside my fortress. No glass, no reflection between us. She was just there. The air grew impossibly cold. I looked down, away from her terrifying face, down at her feet. And what I saw shattered the final remnants of my soul. Her feet were not touching the floor. They were hovering an inch above it. And in the polished surface of my own hardwood floor beneath her, I saw a reflection. It was me. My own face, twisted in terror, staring up from the floorboards. I saw my own fear. My own guilt, the memory of the fire, the searing pain of abandonment. It was all there, reflected in the space she occupied. She was a vessel for my own trauma. I looked back up at her face. The silent scream had stopped.
And in its place, for the first and last time, the ghost of my twin sister smiled. It was not a smile of joy or peace. It was a smile of arrival, of consummation, a final horrifying act of reunion. My vision tunneled. The last thing I saw was that terrible, triumphant smile before the world dissolved into blackness. When I awoke, it was to the gentle light of morning filtering through the window I had run from. For a blissful, disoriented moment, I knew nothing. Then it all flooded back. I was lying on the floor of my living room. The front door was still ajar. The teacup was still shattered near the window. Physically, everything was the same. The apartment was silent, holding its breath. But the atmosphere was poisoned. The space was no longer mine. It was a tomb, a memorial to the death of my reason. I sat up slowly, my body aching. I felt hollowed out, a fragile shell. The woman who had built a fortress of facts was gone, buried under the rubble of an impossible truth. I looked at my reflection in the dark television screen. I was pale, my eyes wide and haunted, but I was alone. She was gone. The confrontation was over, but I knew with a certainty that was now the only truth I had left that she wasn't gone for good. She was just quiet. She was inside me now, a silent passenger, a shared grief. The feeling of abandonment I had harbored for decades had found its twin. The horror wasn't in the haunting, it was in the understanding. She didn't want to hurt me. She didn't want revenge. She just wanted me to feel what she felt, to never be alone again. And in that, she had succeeded completely.
The weeks that followed are a blur of muted grays. I didn't leave the apartment. I couldn't. Every reflective surface was a potential ambush. The polished chrome of the elevator doors, the windows of the subway, the puddles on the street after it rained, they were all portals now, waiting to show me her sorrowful face. My fortress had become my prison. My life's work, the history I had clung to, felt like a collection of meaningless stories. What were verifiable facts in the face of what I had experienced? My world had been split open, revealing a terrifying, illogical dimension I could no longer deny. Then, one afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was my mother. I hadn't spoken to her in months. She stood in the doorway, her eyes the same eyes that had once looked at me with such frantic, deluded terror, now filled with a strange, beatific calm. She looked past me into my apartment as if seeing someone else. She stepped inside, her hand reaching out, not to me, but to the empty space beside me. "There you are," she whispered, a tear tracing a path through her wrinkled makeup. "I've missed you so much." I just stared at her, my mind too fractured to comprehend. She finally looked at me, but her gaze was distant, unfocused. A soft, pitying smile touched her lips. "Oh, Lena, don't you worry. I'll take care of your sister now." And in that moment, the final horror bloomed in the ruins of my mind. My mother, the woman whose irrationality I had rebelled against my entire life, could now see her too. Or rather, she saw what she had always wanted to see. In her world of whispers and phantoms, her lost child had finally come home. She looked at me, her only living daughter, the one who survived the fire, and saw only a vessel, a companion for the ghost she had mourned for 40 years. I'd been abandoned once in the fire, left for a phantom's message. Now, I was being abandoned again, my identity erased, my existence replaced by the reflection of a sister I never knew. I am her keeper. I am her prison. And in my mother's eyes, I am no longer even myself. The reflection in the window had won.
It had taken everything.
The horrors linger. Thank you so much for watching or listening. By liking and subscribing, you're helping me summon the next chilling tale from the shadows. Join our community of the brave and prepare for what's to come.